joining us rather to unpack the emergence of the middle class in Africa and the opportunities that this presents to investors pertaining to the retail and financial services. We have Brian Dlamini, Sovereign Risk Analyst at Grand Merchant Bank. Brian, great to have you on the program. Thank you so very much for joining us. Okay, let's get a definition going. When we talk about middle class in Africa, relative to when we talk about middle class people in the developed nations, is there a disconnect between the two?
Right. I think first things first, we need to define how important for investors this is. We're talking about a third of Africa's 1 billion people. If we put figures to it, we're talking about people who are between $2 and $4 per day. And on the upper band, we're talking about people between $6 and $10 per day in the upper middle class. So that's the definition. But then if we paint a picture about on the numbers, we're talking about people who are about the size of the Chinese or Indian economy in terms of numbers.
We're talking about massive numbers here.
Yes.
So let's just look at what it actually means for investors then going forward, because we're looking at a very different definition to what we see globally when it comes to the middle class sector of the economy. We keep talking about Africans having a lot more to spend. We're talking about the consumer, the African consumer rising, something that we didn't think would happen so soon.
Right, that's true. So if we start unpacking the opportunities here, there's a vast number of opportunities in the financial services sector, telecoms sector, and so on and so forth. But I think the selling point there is that, first of all, it's a tax pool for governments if they're looking to expand the tax base. Second of all, the governments will, as the people move out of the poverty level, they will have less of a burden on the states themselves. Second of all, there are diaspora benefits. As growth continues to expand on the African continent, as resource finds, or rather resource-rich countries start to get more and more resources, that will benefit a lot of countries in terms of that. And I think it definitely is a sustainable model for economic growth going forward.
Okay, so obviously looking at the consumer playing quite a big role. Let's talk about the catalyst that actually prompted a lot of this consumerism to happen, and also the fact that the middle class is rising. It is because we're starting to see a far better economic environment in Africa, or else we wouldn't be seeing this.
Yes. So if we paint a picture, in 1980 we saw 26% of people being defined as middle class on the African continent. In 1990 we saw only 27%, but then if you look at 2010, that has grown to 36%. So there is quite a bit of growth. That has been on the back of strong economic growth, and that has been coupled with the resource boom that we've seen over the last couple of years that has filtered down to a number of these people.
What's also interesting is that we've actually seen quite a sporadic movement. You're talking about what we saw in 1980 and 1990, and we actually saw a little bit of retracement towards the late 1980s. Is there a concern that we could actually see this false dawn emerging once again, where we will see a bit of a retraction?
Well, there is a bit of concern that some of the people will fall to the below $2 per day, which consists of 2/3 of the current population, which is considered as poor. So yes, there are concerns, but with all this, just recently we saw Kenya, for instance, discovering some oil. With all the resource boom that's going on, there is a fair amount of confidence that going forward, this number can only grow, and that the scales will be tipped by 2060, where we'll see a middle class consisting of 2/3 of the African population, as opposed to the current 1/3.
And we just heard it with the previous guest. We're talking about microfinance coming to the fore and really focusing on the small to medium-sized enterprises. Is this also going to be a very pertinent factor in ensuring that we sustain this momentum?
It is a very important one, in the sense that banks will have to, over time, become more confident to lend, to propel growth, because part of the definition of this emerging middle-class person is a person who is salaried or who has got a small business, a person who wants to, who's got ambitions to learn more, do more with their life, and so on and so forth. So with regards to what you're saying, financing will be key to drive the entrepreneurial spirit of the African
And so too
continent.
will be a proper health system
Yes.
across the board, and also education being a very vital point, because skills is what also is required to develop further.
Absolutely. The other benefit in what you're saying is the fact that as people, or rather the middle class, pays for their own education, they pay for their own health care, so the burden goes off the state. And as people pay for their own education, the standard of living gets better. Governments stop concentrating on socio-economic issues, and they start addressing key drivers such as infrastructure, such as investment into making the environment better in the long run.
And it's quite interesting because you started to see a lot of multinational companies coming into Africa, like likes of Unilever have been around for a very long time, and really starting to focus more so on the African continent. Massmart also, with regards to Walmart, that footprint growing quite dramatically. It seems that we're starting to take cue from the private sector as well.
That is quite true, but on the other side, on the flip side of that is that as we go, I think the key driver will be a more entrepreneurial spirit from the African continent. That will be the key driver.
And hopefully creating our own big brands as well. Thank you so much, Brian. Great to have you on the program.